Good afternoon. How is everybody? We were just talking. If you guys came to the second talk of mine, you made the right choice, because the second one is always the better one. We're much looser, and I'll get all the kinks worked out. By a show of hands, how many of you guys here are under the age of 25? Oh my goodness gracious. Wow, that's remarkable. I was looking at you guys, man, everybody looks, I'll be 27, I'm not that old, but that's amazing, and that's so encouraging to see so many young people, so many in this generation who are ready to get out of their comfort zone and serve the Lord. I am really heartened by that. Well, my name is Eric Miller. I'll give you a little bit of my own bio. I was born and raised in Champaign, Illinois, but for the past 7 years, I have been living and working and studying. I'm in school as well, a Bible college student, in Cincinnati, Ohio. And the focus of my ministry is I do congregational ministry at a Spanish-speaking church. So I am not Latino myself. I'm not Hispanic, not naturally a native Spanish speaker. But when I was 16 years old, I went on a short-term mission trip to Mexico. They were actually almost like giving away spots to a trip. And I signed up for it because I thought it would be interesting. Didn't know anything about Mexico. Didn't speak a word of Spanish besides, the random words that we all know. But God did something. God showed up on that week-long trip. It was December 27, 2011 when I left. And I went again in August of 2012 and just kept going back to this children's home in Mexico. Did 3 months in 2014. Did another 3 months just a couple of years ago. And then, of course, when I moved to Cincinnati, I've just been doing Spanish-speaking ministry since then. So that's kind of my background. And I'm really excited to talk to you guys about a subject that's really near and dear to my heart, and that's how to do cross-cultural ministry beneath the surface. And the contrast that I'm making here is between transforming and costuming. Transforming and costuming. And when I'm talking about transformation, I'm not so much talking about the transformation of ourselves, or excuse me, of the people who we're trying to reach, but the transformation of ourselves, how we are doing our ministry. And the way in which I define transforming versus costuming is this way. A transformed missionary, seeks to reach their target culture within the framework of their target culture. So if I'm going to reach out to the majority of people in my community in Price Hill and Cincinnati are Guatemalan. And so if I'm trying to reach out to the Guatemalan people or the people in our community who are Mexican or Honduran, I'm going to do it on their terms in ways that they can understand, in frameworks that make sense to them. That's transforming myself to be kind of an incarnational missionary. On the other hand, we have the kind of costuming model. And that means I'm going to reach these people not with the framework that they understand, but with the framework that I'm most comfortable in. The framework that's my own native framework, my own way of thinking, my own way of working. That's kind of the difference. But it's a costume in the sense that I'm wearing native dress. So what do I mean by that? On a superficial level, I may talk like them. I may dress like them. I may eat their food. But when it comes to doing the actual work of ministry, it's all about me. It's all about my culture. It's all about what I know, because of course we know that what we grew up with is best, right? Those are the kind of assumptions that we had. So I'm going to give you 5 principles that I think will help us as missionaries, as ministers, as servant leaders to get beyond a costuming kind of ministry and move to that transformational level of ministry. How does that sound? And I'm going to use as our kind of our framework for talking the book of Ruth. Now, have you ever had a really great idea and you thought, man, I need to write this down. I need to patent this. I could make money off of this idea. Well, I was so proud of myself. I'm like, I'm going to use the book of Ruth, and we were going to talk about cross-cultural ministry. And it was 2 nights ago, I was doing some research for this talk, and I realized someone actually wrote a book about doing cross-cultural ministry using the book of Ruth. And I was like, what? That was my great idea. I have not read the book. It was written a long time ago. I'm sure it's a good book. Probably not as good as this talk is going to be, I imagine. But so if you happen to see that, it is out there. But we are going to be in the book of Ruth. And the first principle I want to give you guys is that transformed missionaries leave behind the known of their own culture to embrace the unknown of their target culture. Transformed missionaries leave behind the known of their own culture to embrace the unknown of their target culture. And I'm going to start reading in Ruth chapter 1. I'm going to read verses 14 through 19. If you have a Bible, you can turn there. In Ruth chapter 1, I'm going to read verses 14 through 19. Beginning in verse 14, it says this. At this they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. Look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. When Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging. So the two women went on until they came to Bethlehem. I love this picture in the book of Ruth, and we normally think about this in terms of weddings. At least this is when I've usually heard this passage preached. But it actually is a picture of who we are and what we're supposed to be as missionaries. Understand here that Ruth had every reason not to want to go with Naomi. If you know anything about the Old Testament, you know about the relationship between the people of Moab and the people of Israel. It was not a congenial relationship. And in the law of Moses, it says that no Ammonite or Moabite can enter into the assembly of the Lord, even to the 10th generation. So she was going to a people who were hostile, people who didn't get her, who spoke a bit of a different language, people who have a culture very foreign from her own. Why would any reasonable, rational person do something like that? What would compel a person to make that kind of a decision? Well, she loved her mother-in-law. She loved Naomi. And she didn't want to leave her hanging out to dry after she had lost her husband, after she had lost her sons-in-law. Okay, why do we do what we do? Why have you guys put yourselves in situations where you're reaching out to people who maybe speak a different language? If they don't speak a different language, maybe they have a different dialect, a different way of speaking, and on a deeper level, a different way of handling conflicts, a different way of raising children, a different way of relating to each other, and you find yourself in situations where you're frustrated or you don't understand or you're being challenged. Why do you do that? Hopefully, I imagine, you do it first of all because you love God. You love God, and you love His Son, and you love the gospel. And together with that, you love people. You love the people that you're serving, and you want to transmit to them the same love for God, the same love for Jesus, the same love for the gospel. This is what's going to move us to leave behind what we're comfortable with, the known of our own culture, and to embrace the unknown of the native culture. How does that differ from the kind of costuming missions that we see so often? Well, one way is that those missionaries often, I know this isn't, not everybody can live where they minister, but when you're doing long-term missionary work, whether it's overseas or stateside, often people are unwilling to live where they're ministering. They're kind of phoned it in. So you can come to us, you can come to our church, you can come to our program, you can come to our thing, but I'm not going to that side of town. I know what happens over there. I want to keep myself safe. That's one thing. Or if they do live where they minister, they refuse to adapt to the culture. So I'll show up, but when I'm here, we're going to do things my way. We're going to do things the way that I was taught. We're going to do things the way that I learned in my church. Or if they do adapt to the culture, they only do it on the most superficial of levels. So, okay, I memorized a few facts about the country where you're from or about the community or whatever, and again, I'll eat your food, and okay. But when it comes to decision making, when it comes to thinking, when it comes to relating to you beyond that superficial level, again, I'm always going to have recourse back to what I'm most familiar with. This is what we want to get rid of because this is going to prevent us from being able to have the significant relationships that we need in order to transmit the knowledge of the gospel to the people who we're trying to reach. So that first point is that we're going to leave behind the known of our own culture to embrace the unknown of the native culture. The second point is that transformed missionaries accept vulnerability and risk as a part of their job description. So transformed missionaries accept vulnerability and risk as a part of their job description. I'm just going to read a short verse from Ruth 2:2 I have written here. It says, Ruth the Moabite said to Naomi, "Let me go to the fields and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor." And Naomi said to her, "Go ahead, my daughter." Now, again, if you understand the context here, Ruth is a young, single, foreign woman who's asking her mother-in-law, "All right, give me permission to go out. We're going to starve if we sit here. There's a drought, whatever. I can go out. I can glean grain. I can help us." But she was putting herself at risk. And in verse 22 in the next chapter, even Naomi concedes to that a bit. When you get outside of your comfort zone, when you go to a different culture, you may be putting yourself at some sort of risk or assuming some sort of vulnerability. I live in the ghetto, y'all. I live in the ghetto. And I told the last group, it was so funny, I was talking to a guy at my work the other day, and he also lives in the ghetto, but I told him what part of Cincinnati he lived in. He said, no, you live in the ghetto. You live in the real ghetto. And I'll tell you what, I've been threatened, I've been assaulted, I've had things stolen out of my car, I've had my car stolen itself, I've had to call the police, I've had to break up fights, I mean, you name it in that short 7-year period that I've been in Price Hill. But that's just part of it. That's just part of it. I remember when I was a senior in high school, I went to Cincinnati for the first time for a convention that we were doing. And they told all of us, okay, the school we were at was at the top of a hill. They said, don't go down the hill. Don't go down the hill. All kinds of other stuff happens down there. You want to stay up here where it's safe. And I just remember thinking to myself, I want to go down that hill. I want to go down the hill. And that was when I made the decision. This would be years later that I would move, but I made the decision that this is where I want to serve. Because that's where we're called to serve, We're called to go into the dark places and the difficult places because those are the people who need Jesus, Those are the people who need the light that we have been called to carry. But when we do so, we go believing that Jesus is the way. Not what I've learned, not my preferences, not my ideas, not my culture. There may be things that I can share that are helpful, of course. And there are going to be things in your target culture that you're not going to adopt because it might be contrary to the Word of God. But what we're going to share is not ourselves. We're going to share Christ, and that's going to involve a certain amount of risk. And some of you will never experience maybe the kind of physical risks that certain people will, depending on what mission environment they're in. But there's another kind of risk that can be just as difficult, and that's the emotional risk that you take when you do any kind of ministry. And those of you who have been in ministry much longer than I have know what I'm talking about. Because you're going to pour into people and pour into them and teach them, and you're going to sit with them and you're going to listen to their fears and their hurts, and you're going to eat with them and their homes, and they're going to come to your home, and you're going to fellowship, and you're going to be in church together, and you're going to sing, and you're going to worship, and you're going to know that you're brothers and sisters in Christ, and then something is going to happen, and that relationship is going to be ruptured, and they're going to leave the church. And then somebody else is going to come in, and when you go to invest in them, you're going to hear the enemy whisper in your ear, remember what happened the last time? You gave all that time, all that energy, you opened yourself up, and what'd they do? They betrayed you. And you're going to want to resist. You're going to want to pull back. Oh, you'll be polite, you'll be kind, you'll smile, you'll do the church thing that all of us who grew up in church know how to do, but you're not going to want to give your heart away again. That's another kind of risk of vulnerability. And to be honest with you, I prefer getting beat up physically to that kind of risk. But do we know anybody who poured into their disciples day after day, year after year, only to in his last moments be deserted by all the people who he invested in? Yeah, you do. Think of Jesus. But he did it. And he knew it was going to happen. He said, strike the shepherd and the sheep are going to be scattered. But he did it anyways because he loved God and he loved his disciples. And guess what? You're going to get your heart broken if you do ministry. That's part of it. But we do it because we love God and we love the people that we're serving. And we know that when that happens, he's going to be there to pick us up and to bind up our wounds just like he was there for his son. So the third point is that transformed missionaries accept assistance and leadership from those in their target culture. Transformed missionaries accept assistance and leadership from those in their target culture. And I'm going to read from Ruth 2, verses 8 through 10. Ruth 2, verses 8 through 10. Which says this: So Boaz said to Ruth, "My daughter, listen to me. Don't go and glean in another field, and don't go away from here. Stay here with my servant girls. Watch the field where the men are harvesting, and follow along after the girls. I have told the men not to touch you, and whenever you are thirsty, go and get a drink from the water jars the men have filled." At this she bowed down with her face to the ground. She exclaimed, "Why have I found such favor in your eyes that you notice me, a foreigner?" Now, notice what Ruth did not say here. She didn't say, listen, don't you know we have fields in Moab? I know how to glean. I know what I'm doing. Why are you patronizing me? I got this, man. No, she understood that he was being a genuine help to her. This was a favor from God. And yet sometimes when we go into our target culture, we bristle and feel maybe even prideful to a certain extent when people want to give us advice or leadership or guidance. The reality is that even if we've been to conferences like this one, or Bible institutes, I'm in a Bible college, even if we spend all of our lives in church, we know the Bible backward and forward, even though we assume that our way of doing things is best, which is a natural assumption, though often and routinely wrong, even if we feel like we have all this knowledge and things to give, we have to trust that the real experts of the culture that we're trying to reach are the people from within that culture. It's not ourselves. Even though we took a 3-week class on how to reach Latinos, it's the Latino people who know the Latino people better. And so I have to be humble enough to listen to others. So you have to ask yourself, how do you react when people try to give you guidance? Do the people in your church, in your club, in your ministry know that you're the kind of person who can receive correction? Or people are like, you know what, I'm not even going to bother because he just tries to justify himself every time every time I try to bring something up. What I've learned, and I know this in Hispanic culture in general, at least particularly in Mexican culture, people are not going to come to me very rarely and correct me. That's just not the way they do things. We don't do direct confrontation like that. So I learned to pick up on the indirects. Oh, Eric, you're wearing your backwards baseball cap to church. That's interesting. And I make a note to myself, okay, so don't do that again. That's a no. And you learn over time, okay, they have their ways of communicating to you that, okay, maybe we're out of line here or something like that. And when that happens, I have formed relationships with these people, so I know that they're not just being overly critical. They're not just trying to get down on me. They're giving me helpful advice that's going to help me reach them better and other people outside of the church. So that's the kind of people that we need to be. But what does a person who's wearing a costume do? One, they're never going to accept assistance from those in their target culture, except if we're talking about the most trivial of things, okay? They're never going to relinquish that control that comes with letting somebody else tell you how to do something. And the example I gave from Jesus was when he healed the child of the Syrophoenician woman in the Gospels. And at first, Jesus says, and he acts like he's not going to heal her daughter, I think it was. And he says, it's not right to give the children's bread and give it to the dogs. And she responds to Jesus and says, well, even, the dogs eat the crumbs from the master's table. And Jesus is like, whoa, you've got strong faith. And then he heals her daughter. Jesus listened. Jesus had an actual dialogue with this woman about healing her daughter. Okay, if Jesus can learn, or if Jesus is willing to listen, how can we not be willing to listen? Who of us, has even that same level of knowledge? So that's also important. And similar to that, and the fourth point is that she listened to trusted counsel. And this is from Ruth 3, 1 through 5. One day Ruth's mother-in-law Naomi said to her, "My daughter, I must find a home for you where you will be well provided for. Now Boaz, with whose woman you have worked, is a relative of ours. Tonight he'll be winnowing barley on the threshing floor. Wash, put on perfume, and get dressed in your best clothes. Then go down to the threshing floor, but don't let him know you're there until he has finished eating and drinking. When he lies down, note the place where he is lying. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down. He will tell you what to do. And this is what Ruth says in verse 5. I will do whatever you say. Now, I grew up in church. That was some weird advice. That was some weird advice. I've always read the book of Ruth and thought, well, that's just kind of strange. I don't know what she's trying to tell her there. And I'm sure it felt kind of strange to Ruth, too. She wasn't from Israel. She didn't know these customs. What in the world? I'm going to go and lie down at his feet. What's happening here? But she did it anyways. Why? Because even though she didn't get the information, she trusted the source of information. She knew that her mother-in-law was not going to steer her in the wrong direction. She knew that she knew better than Ruth herself knew, and so she was willing to do that. Are you surrounding yourself with people in your target culture who can give you that kind of wise, godly counsel, or are all the people that you listen to people who think just like you do? Okay? That's the kind of costuming that we want to get beyond. We want to be able to listen to people, and I understand this is not always possible. When I first came to my church, there was this is true with everybody, because I'm one brother in particular I'm thinking of who was very wise, but there was a lack of discipleship, and so there wasn't maybe people to give wise counsel. But and this kind of goes with the last point. Something I'm really excited about is I went to one brother and said, listen, I'm going to be in Pennsylvania over the weekend. Do you mind leading the Bible study on Saturdays? I teach a Bible study on Saturdays. And he said, yeah, absolutely, of course. And I went to another sister and said, I'm not going to be able to lead worship. Can you do the song service? Oh, yeah, sure, absolutely. A year ago, 2 years ago, never would have been able to do that. But because of the work that we've been doing, because of the work that we've been pouring into the people in the church, we're equipping them to do the work. I'm being able to equip them and the other brother who preaches with me to do the work that we're doing so that when we're gone, everything doesn't fall apart. This is, I don't know about you guys, this just gets me so excited. This is, I feel like, what I'm living for. Like, when I see this brother, and I know he wouldn't mind me telling him his story. When I came to the church, it was just his wife faithfully bringing the kids to church every Sunday while he was out doing all kinds of stuff. He was, in drinking and just carousing and all kinds of other things. Slowly started to come to the church. We'd have kind of conversations or whatever. And just bit by bit, as he started coming to Bible studies, he'd come for a while, then he'd go back to the world, and he'd come back and forth. Long story short, about 2 years ago, I baptized him. And this year, he preached his first sermon. I'll tell you what, the change in his life, to see that up close, to see what the Holy Spirit has done in his life, and now he can lead Bible studies, and he preaches more than I do now, and just being able to pass that on. That's why we're doing what we're doing. But if you just kind of hole yourself in, where it's just us going in to do all of the work, and you're never passing that on, well, when you leave, the ministry's going to leave with you. You're not going to have anything to give to anybody else. We also need to listen and not just hear. This is important because there are many people who, and I've seen this, somebody, maybe a native person, will go up to them and they'll be trying to kindly give them some sort of correction, and they'll go, yeah. Maybe they even write something down. But in the back of their mind, they're thinking, I'm never going to do that. That's never going to happen. Oh, they only knew. They only had the knowledge that I had and all the training that I had. They're hearing what they're saying, but they're not listening. Okay? We need to be humble people. We need to recognize that there are other people who have to invest in our lives, in our ministry, and into our understanding, not just to hear, but also to listen. Finally, point number 5, that a transformed missionary will sacrifice their own entitlements. And I'm going to read from Ruth Chapter 3, verses 9 through 10. It says this. Who are you? This is Boaz talking. Who are you? He asked. I am your servant Ruth, she said. Spread the corner of your garment over me, since you are the guardian and redeemer of our family. The Lord bless you, my daughter, he replied. This kindness is greater than that which you showed earlier. You have not run after younger men, whether rich or poor. So from here we see the implication is that Boaz is to some extent older than Ruth is. And he gets it. She's not going after him because he's the most eligible bachelor in Bethlehem. That's not what's happening here. She has an ulterior motive that's much more noble than anything she's getting out of this relationship. And it's the same way, it should be the same way with those of us who are in ministry. You're going to make sacrifices in general to follow Jesus. We all know that. Take up your cross and follow me. But you're also going to make particular, specific sacrifices when you leave behind your culture and embrace another culture. A small example that I gave for me was just the way I was used to doing church. I grew up in a very well-oiled church that was pretty large. You come to church and there's the coffee's already ready, and the pastor's doing his thing and the slides, and you've got I come from a more of an evangelical background, so we've got a band. We've got music, and it all sounds good. It's all professional, and I don't have to do anything except show up, basically, and bring a smile on my face. And all of a sudden, I'm in a church where we're just a handful of families, and it's like, if I don't come to church and turn on the lights, or if the other brother doesn't come into church and turn the lights are not going to get turned on. If I don't put up the slides, or if I don't preach, or if I don't do these things myself and some of the other ministers, nobody else is going to come and do it. So suddenly I'm doing all I have these new responsibilities that I didn't have before, and there's a sense in which I had connected the size of my church to the legitimacy of a church. So growing up in a large church, it's like, we're a church. I can invite people to church, whatever. But, when you're in a church of like maybe 20 or 30 people, which I was completely unaccustomed to, it's like, is this even real? Is what are we at church level yet, or are we like pre-church? It's like, what's really happening here? I had to sacrifice a lot of my ideas about what made a church and what I was entitled to in order to serve in my community. In addition to that, in our community, and I talked about this some in the talk last year, there's a lot of animosity between the Hispanics and the African Americans in the community that I come from. And I had to sacrifice my entitlement to being offended to a large extent, which is not easy. Because you get people who make comments, and one cultural difference in particular between Mexican culture and ours is that there's no political correctness, okay? They call it as they see it. And nobody is trying to be malicious, it's just a difference, There's not that feeling of a need to kind of sugarcoat everything and, just, if you're, if you're a heavier person in Mexico, they call you gordo, which means fat. That is your nickname. If you're skinny, they call you flaco, which means skinny. And I'm telling you, nobody gets offended. It's just your nickname, and that's what it is. When I went to Mexico for the first time, they referred to me by the color of my skin. And if somebody did that here, it was kind of like, we're going to have a problem. Before I became non-resistant. Now it's kind of like, whatever. God bless you. Turn the other cheek. But doing it in Mexico, they weren't being offensive. That's just the way they talk. Now, sometimes, however, when I'm doing ministry in Cincinnati, people will say things that are frankly prejudiced. But the question is, do I care more about my own ego, or do I care more about the long term of trying to reach those people for the gospel? You know what I mean? It's like, so the Lord has dealt with me and helped me to mature to a place where, at least where I'm trying to get to, where it's like I've sacrificed that entitlement to being offended or not having my feelings hurt for something greater, and that is reaching those people with the gospel. And finally, what's the result of all this? Well, the result is that you can be, as Ruth was, a blessing by God and a testimony of his favor. And I want to read two passages from the book of Ruth to end our time together. Ruth 3:11 says this, "And now, my daughter, don't be afraid. I will do for you all you ask. All the people of my town know that you are a woman of noble character." To the people in your neighborhood, in your church, in your kids club, in your ministry, in your school, whatever, do they know that you are a man or woman of noble character? Not that you have all the answers, that you're a great speaker, that you're this or you're that, but you're a person of noble, Christ-like character who truly loves the people that you're serving. If you don't know how to answer that question, that's all right. I'm not asking it so you feel guilty, one way or the other. It's something to shoot for. It's an example that we want to be. And also a verse in chapter 4, starting at verse 13. This is one of my favorites. "So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife. And when he had known her, the Lord enabled her to conceive, and she gave birth to her son. The women said to Naomi, 'Praise be to the Lord, who this day has not left you without a guardian redeemer. May he become famous throughout Israel. He will renew your life and sustain you in your old age. For your daughter-in-law, who loves you, and who is better to you than 7 sons, has given him birth. And if you know the price or the weight that was put on sons in that kind of a patriarchal culture, you understand what it means that the people of the town were looking at Ruth, a Moabitess, a foreigner, and saying, she's better to you, Naomi, than 7 sons. That's what we want to be in our communities. We want to be people who are of noble character, people who are valuable, not because we feel like we have all the best culture and all the best ideas, but because of the love of Christ that we show to others. And one of my favorite passages in the Bible, but in the New Testament, is in Philippians chapter 2, and it says that each one of you should have the same mindset that was in Christ Jesus, who, though he existed in the form of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage, but made himself nothing, taking the form of a servant. And being made in human likeness, he found himself obedient to death, even on a cross. Therefore God exalted him to the highest place and gave him the name that is above every name, so at the name of Jesus every knee will bow in earth, on earth, and under the earth, and every tongue confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. We have a picture in Ruth of mission work, but we have an even better picture of mission work in Jesus. He didn't consider that equality that he had with God something to be used to his own advantage, but he took on our flesh and blood skin, willing to suffer and die and live in this fallen, sinful world for us. And we, as followers of Jesus Christ, can do no less. And as we do that, looking to Jesus as the author and finisher of our faith, we know that he's going to make us a blessing just like he did for him. And so that's my encouragement for you. I know it's difficult. I know it's difficult. And there have been days where I've thought to myself, Lord, what did I get myself into? Don't grow weary in doing good. Keep digging. Keep seeking after the Lord. You know he has put you exactly where he's put you for a particular reason, and don't let anyone tell you anything different. So that's all I have for you guys. Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions? That's a good question. I think, again, this is where it becomes so important that we don't try and be Lone Ranger Christians. And that's definitely my tendency, to feel like I've got to do it. I've got to do all this stuff by myself and be independent and do this and that. That'll get you burned out really quick, but it will also prevent you from recovering. You need people who you can talk to. Not even necessarily people who are just going to give you advice, but people who you can go to, who you can cry to and say, listen, this is what happened with this person, this is how I got my heart broken, whatever. Because chances are, about everybody else on your team, trusted ministers that you can go to, whoever they are, have been through the same thing, and they can give you counsel. And it's just part of life, you know what I mean? I mean, for those of you who are in relationships, maybe the person you're married to is the first person that you're in a relationship with, or maybe you dated somebody else and got your heart broken, or whatever else, Did you stop loving? I'm never going to do this again. Maybe you thought that, but, somebody else came along and look how the Lord blessed it. It's the same thing with ministry, It's part of it. It happens, but we need to be honest with others, trusted mentors who can help us kind of process those kinds of feelings and keep moving forward step by step. It's a good question. Anything else? Well, in that case, thank you very much. You guys are dismissed.